How do you scale authentic relationships in an increasingly digital world? This is where many wealth management firms hit a wall. They've built their success on personal connections and referral-driven growth. But when they try to communicate their value proposition at scale, they default to generic industry messaging that strips away everything that made them distinctive in the first place. The wealth management industry has been notoriously slow to embrace sophisticated marketing, treating it either as an unnecessary expense or a compliance nightmare. But firms that figure out how to authentically communicate their culture and capabilities through modern channels gain an enormous competitive advantage. KAR faced this exact challenge. How do you tell a story of institutional quality investment management and boutique level relationships to global audiences without losing what makes you special? Here's Stephanie on how they've navigated this evolution.
Yeah, I mean, it couldn't be any more different today than when I started. I mean, I've been here 25 years and I was here when we built our first website, and that was a big deal. It was just a floating brochure that we had out there. And now it's a tool for driving business. And so, we worked on collateral and we worked on our website. That was marketing. And I have this is going to date me, but I have this old comic, Dilbert comic in my office. And this one of the characters was like, I want to work in marketing because that's just liquor and guessing. And it's like, and I'm like, that was the reputation that marketing had. And now it's, we have data and analytics and so many tools. And, but I think there's some core elements of it that are still the same. I think being someone who's worked in data for a long time, I've always said that data is more of an art than a science. Like data can provide you good information directionally, but also you got to look at just what's in front of your face and make some good decisions. And I think the combination of that is what makes marketing so effective nowadays. But it's really, the platforms, how many levers you can pull in to reach clients. And different audiences, meeting them wherever they are, social, podcast, video, website. I mean, we have so many different ways. And then content. I mean, we're here to educate and make people better investors, financially more savvy. And how can we do that? It's all through marketing. And so I just think it's, just become more sophisticated and hopefully more helpful to the end user because we're sharing our knowledge. So, more and more tools and a lot more data to work with, but essentially the same thing at the end of the day. How do we represent our brand? How do we be as authentic as possible? How do we, just share those core values through a lot of different mediums? That's really the goal at the end of the day.
And I think that you have challenges and opportunities in your seat specifically because of the scope and scale and size of the business and the differentiated segments of the market that you serve. So sort of on the institutional investment management side and then on the wealth advisory business. Yeah. Very different types of clients and then just a breadth of services that it's beyond what most typical marketing, departments in this space have to work through. Yeah. So how do you approach that when you're thinking about the strategy? How do you sort of look at it all, zoom out and look at it all, but then identify, here's where we're going to focus in each of these areas?
Yeah, I mean, there is overlap. So, we are at our core, we're, as Steve was saying, we're investors. We have an investment expertise and sophistication. So there's overlap between both businesses there. But then there's nuances. Wealth advisory is much more about the individual and a broader set of information that they're interested in. Investment management is more product specific. And how do we explain how we think about the markets and how we think it's best that clients approach individual companies. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to demonstrate that we're smart and thoughtful people who put care into how we handle our clients. And so we just demonstrate that in just a different way, whether it be through, data or analytics charts, or whether that be through how we explain, children's education or estate planning or something of that nature. So it's, you're really talking about different topics, but you're approaching it in a similar fashion. And so, and then it's just learning about your audience. How do they want to get communicated to, And like I said, we have a lot of different platforms to do that now. Is it a short video clip that explains something very succinctly, or do you want to give them a 45-minute podcast where you can go into depth and explain that? When we originally started our podcast way back in the day, people didn't even know what podcast meant. We put a description, we had a definition of what podcast was. I always tell this story because I think it's a good demonstration of how, Steve and Janine function as our management team. But I'm a commuter and I started listening to podcasts back in the day, and I was like, this thing's great. I can start and stop it. It's informational while I'm sitting on the freeway. And I was like, this is a great way to convey our portfolio information, what's helping, what's hurting, et cetera. So I went into their office and I'm like, I want to do this thing called a podcast. And they're like, what's that? I'm like, we just record it. And they're like, okay, great. Why not? And so we walked over to the Apple store, bought a mic and a laptop and started it on GarageBand. But I think that's kind of part of our entrepreneurial roots. They're like, you got an idea, try it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, great. But it was helpful for our institutional audience, but also helpful for our wealth advisory clients. So there's places where, there's crossover there. And then you can also take that message and nuance it in terms of how sophisticated you want to get in talking about a portfolio, or how you want to maybe just talk about general trends, et cetera. Right. So you can use similar formats and just, nuance the messaging depending on your audience.